The power grid could come under strain as Eskom prepares to take Unit 2 of the Koeberg nuclear power station offline from tomorrow. It will be for 5 months. It's for routine maintenance, which includes the replacement of the unit's steam generator. Eskom says Unit 2 has been operating without interruption for over 450 days. The utility says the overhaul is standard procedure for such energy plants. Eskom, of course, also confirming that Unit 1 will be taken offline once the maintenance at 2 is complete.
This will be the 25th refueling outage on Koeberg Unit 2 since commissioning. And we'll also see the replacement of the Unit 3 steam generators. During this outage, the reactor pressure vessel head, which houses the nuclear fuel during operation, will also be replaced. Just to note also Unit 1, which is of a similar size to Unit 2, that outage will start later on in the year, and during that outage the 3 steam generators will also be replaced.
Eskom has applied for an electricity price increase of 20.5%. It's from April. The utility claims the increase is needed to address financial sustainability and liquidity challenges, the Democratic Alliance being one of those that has slammed Eskom's request, describing it as ludicrous. We're joined by the Sinan Energy CEO, Mohamed Madhi. Mohamed, good evening to you and thank you so much for your time. South Africans have barely recovered from the 15% increase in electricity that was granted to Eskom last year, a 20% increase. How do you, as Sinan Energy, view this request?
Look, I think it's not unexpected. It is very unfortunate and it is disproportionate. Disproportionate in terms of what is expected for the public to carry this kind of increase. You know, when Eskom raises its prices, the effect is felt throughout the economy. It's not a localized effect. And every single sector, every single industry is affected, and every person, in the street, every layperson is also affected. So it has a fundamental impact on the economy, and a 20% increase is clearly going to be devastating to the public and for our economic growth.
In describing the reasons behind this request, Eskom has said a significant part of it is related to the cost of regulating effectively independent power producers and processing that energy through the Eskom system. And yet, of course, on the other hand, we know that there have been ongoing calls for an increase in independent power producers. When you study this reasoning, does it make sense to you?
So look, they're using the IPPs as the latest scapegoat for the price increases. It's important to distinguish between the two kinds of IPPs. We get IPPs that provide power and sell it through Eskom and send it through the grid to Eskom clients. And then you have IPPs who are independent of Eskom completely and who sell power directly to end users. This is now allowed in our regulatory framework. So the IPPs that they are referring to are the ones that sell power through the Eskom grid. Now, those IPPs make up a very small portion of Eskom's overall sales and as well as their, income and expenditure. So to blame those IPPs for such a disproportionate increase is pulling the wool over the public's eyes, and it's also insulting the intelligence of industry experts and the industry as a whole. You know, when a claim like this is made, it's best to actually, for Eskom and the officials responsible for this, to come forward with the actual numbers and let an independent group of experts sit down and interrogate those numbers and actually test whether what they're saying is correct or not.
Of course, one of the difficulties that this also leaves consumers with is coming out of COVID-19 over the last 2 years, and we're very much still in the grips of it. People have lost work, the cost of living has increased, and yet we're seeing another price increase that is way above the inflation rate and above salary increases that people have not received.
Yeah. So again, you're 100% right, and to repeat, these increases from Eskom are going to hit consumers directly in terms of their monthly bills, but also indirectly in terms of prices of everything else going up. Transportation, for example, will go up. Various other kinds of costs will go up as a result of these price increases. So it has a knock-on effect in a number of different areas. The solution, however, is not a quick fix, and it's not just not giving a high increase. Firstly, we shouldn't give such a high increase. But, we need to be able to review Eskom's entire role within the electricity supply industry and within industry in general, the economy in general, and restructure that. As I've stated before, we need to start reducing the importance of Eskom and start reducing the role that Eskom plays. One of the ways to do this is to unbundle Eskom, also to allow independent power producers to sell directly to end users without Eskom's interference in any way. So there are a number of initiatives that have to be taken. The problem is those initiatives are either stalled or are not getting the attention that they should be getting from Eskom's primary shareholder. And until that happens, we're not going to see an end to these kinds of problems. These problems need a fundamental addressing by Eskom's primary shareholder and with input from industry experts.
So just taking a look at the two that you've outlined, you talked about unbundling Eskom. That's already on the cards, and we continue to hear how the process of unbundling Eskom is already underway, but it doesn't seem to have had an impact ultimately on electricity prices. The issue of independent power generation. Recently, of course, we had the president finalizing exactly what it is that industry and municipalities would be able to produce or procure independently. But of course, it takes years for those processes and that energy production to actually come online.
So the energy production, depending on where it's done and the mix that is used, does happen quite rapidly. It can happen as quickly as within 4 to 8 months, where you build a power plant on site for a client and deliver the power to them directly. So that part can be done quite easily, and there is a fair amount of leeway or allowance now in the regulatory regime to allow that. Where the problem sits is in NERSA approving some of these things and then Eskom having to be part of that process when you need to interconnect the grid. And Eskom does, retard that process, does delay that process, and that's where we need to improve that. In terms of Eskom unbundling, now, I used to be a capital program manager at Eskom in the late 90s. And since then, we've been talking about unbundling, and there was the whole issue of the reds, and it's gone through several phases. Government has spoken about this, but there's been nothing concrete that's actually been done. And part of the problem is the role that Eskom itself is playing in the unbundling process. We need to restructure how that unbundling process is going and put some timelines on it to ensure that it happens. Because nothing has happened, we haven't yet seen the benefits of any unbundling because there has been no unbundling as yet.
Let's focus now on the issue of some of these evergreen tenders that we know some were irregularly entered into. Do you think that there's been a good enough job done to cancel some of those contracts to ensure that money that is being lost, whether it's through higher procurement than what is necessary, that money is ultimately recovered?
It's very difficult to talk about contractual matters without getting the actual contracts and getting all the nuances of the contract in place. But one can speak in general terms from benchmarks and from costs that one knows in the industry. And it's very clear that these contracts are excessively weighed towards the suppliers and seem to be disproportionate to what is normal prices, what are benchmark prices. So I think not enough has been done. I think there has not been enough transparency around those contracts. And certainly the onus is on Eskom to try and get those contracts in line with industry norms and industry practices.
What happens if NERSA does grant Eskom this latest increase?
Well, you see, there's a couple of unintended consequences. So the first one that we all know, the intended consequence, of course, the tariff goes up and everyone suffers as a consequence directly and indirectly through the economic ripple effect. But Eskom, in a way, is digging its own grave, because as these tariffs go up, independent power producers are able to provide power much cheaper already than Eskom, and they become more competitive as Eskom tariffs go up. So Eskom will lose more of its market share, more of its revenue will be eroded, and then next year it will end up asking for a greater increase again because it will have a reduced market share, an increased cost burden, and a high level of debt which needs to be serviced. So this cycle will continue. And we are already past that inflection point where independent power producers can outmaneuver and outcompete Eskom. And that's just going to get worse. So Eskom is going to get into a more and more dire strait.
Sinan Energy CEO Mohamed Madhi, thanks for your time tonight. Well,